Some people win money on television. Every once in a while, someone wins on television and shows everyone in the room what money is actually for. Dorothea Simmons had not told a single person she was nervous. This was consistent with 68 years of prior behavior. She had not told anyone she was nervous before her wedding in 1979, before each of her 3 children's births, before the morning she walked into the county assistant's office in Shreveport, Louisiana, in 2009 with a folder of documents and a face that gave nothing away, to apply for the help she needed after her husband Raymond's trucking company had folded and taken with it 22 years of their combined financial life. She had not told anyone she was nervous then, either. She had sat in the plastic chair and waited her turn and conducted the interview with the caseworker with the precise, cooperative composure of a woman who has decided that dignity does not take days off, including the ones that most severely test it. She was 71 years old and had driven herself to the studio in Burbank, California, from her apartment in Inglewood. 41 minutes, no freeway. She did not do freeways, a position she had held since 1994 and had never revisited. In a burgundy Buick LeSabre that was 18 years old and had 211,000 miles on it, and that she referred to, with complete seriousness, as Bernard. Bernard had been serviced 6 weeks before the taping, because Dot had decided that if she was going to drive to a television studio, she was going to drive there in a car that had been recently seen to, which was the same logic she applied to everything. You prepare the thing before you need it, not after. The nervousness she had not told anyone about lived, as it always had, exclusively in her hands. Her hands gave her away, had given her away for 50 years, to the people who knew to look. They moved slightly more than necessary when she was anxious, a barely perceptible increased activity, as if her hands were doing quiet work to manage what the rest of her was not allowed to show. Her daughter Charisse had known since she was 12 years old. She had never mentioned it to her mother. Some knowledge you keep because keeping it is its own form of love. Charisse was 42 and was beside her on the stage, along with Dot's son-in-law Percy, her grandson Malik, who was 19 and studying electrical engineering at Cal State, and who had the particular contained excitement of a young person trying to behave with more composure than he actually felt, and Dot's best friend of 31 years, Connie Marsh, who had agreed to be the 5th team member with zero hesitation, and who had spent the drive to the studio reviewing every episode of the show she had watched in the previous month, which was all of them, because Connie did not enter competitions without preparation, and considered any other approach a form of disrespect to the competition. The Simmons family was there because of Malik. He had submitted the application 8 months before as a birthday gift to his grandmother. Not a wrapped gift, not a card, but an action taken on her behalf. The kind of gift that says, "I have been paying attention to you in a language that transcends the object." He had filled out every field carefully. In the additional context section, he had written about Raymond, about the trucking company and the county assistant's office and the plastic chair. He had written about the apartment in Inglewood and the Buick, and the fact that his grandmother called it Bernard. He had written, in the last line, something that the segment producer had read 3 times before flagging it. She has spent her whole life making sure everyone around her had enough. I would like her to have a day where someone does that for her. He had not shown his grandmother what he wrote. She did not know he had written it. She did not know anyone at the show knew anything about Raymond or the plastic chair or Bernard. She thought she was there to play a game. She intended to win it. The competing family was the Figueiredo family from Stockton, a mother named Vera, her twin adult sons, Marco and Paolo, Paolo's wife Diane, and a teenage niece named Sophia, who was 16 and who had the uncanny composure of a person who has been the youngest in every room she has ever entered and has learned to compensate by being the most prepared. The Figueiredos were warm and loud, in the particular way of large Portuguese families who have been loud together long enough that the noise has become structural. Not chaos, but a kind of sonic architecture, everyone speaking at once in a way that somehow produces coherence. They had greeted the Simmons family in the holding area with a generosity that was entirely genuine, and that Connie had noted and approved of, which was the relevant standard as far as the Simmons team was concerned. Dot had assessed the Figueiredo family with the quiet, comprehensive speed that was one of her primary skills. She had noted Vera's focus, Marco's tendency to hesitate on the buzzer, Sophia's stillness, which read as dangerous. She had filed all of this and returned her attention to her own preparation, which was internal and not visible, and which Charisse recognized from the particular set of her mother's shoulders, the slight forward angle that meant, "I am ready, and I am not telling anyone." Steve Harvey had been given Malik's paragraph. He had read it on the drive in. Philip, without being asked, had taken the long route. The game was immediate, and it was close. Dot was extraordinary at it in a way that surprised no one who knew her and electrified everyone who didn't. She read questions with the speed of someone who has spent 7 decades paying close attention to everything, which is the actual skill the game requires, dressed up as trivia knowledge. She buzzed in 3 times in the first round. She was right all 3 times. After the 3rd correct answer, she turned briefly to Connie and gave her a look that communicated volumes in the specific shorthand of 31-year friendships. And Connie returned the look with equal precision, and neither of them said a word. Malik had his hand over his mouth for most of the first round. Percy kept exhaling. Charisse played with the focused calm of a woman who has inherited her mother's composure gene and has been practicing it consciously for 42 years. Sophia Figueiredo, the teenage niece, turned out to be exactly as dangerous as her stillness suggested. She answered 4 questions correctly, including one that caused the audience to react with the specific delight of surprise. An answer nobody expected her to know, delivered in the tone of someone who finds it mildly interesting that anyone would find it surprising. Dot looked at her across the stage after that answer with an expression that was the closest thing to pure appreciation Dot's face produced in competitive situations. Steve had been watching Dot the entire first round. He had not yet approached the family. He was reading her hands specifically, which Charisse had been reading for 30 years, and which Steve, from his vantage of 30 years reading people on stages, was reading now for the first time, and with the full attention of someone who knows what they're looking at. Between the 2nd and 3rd rounds, he walked toward the Simmons family. He stopped in front of Dot. He looked at her for a moment with the direct, receiving attention that is his particular gift, and that certain people recognize immediately as different from being looked at for television purposes. He said, "Miss Dot, I need to ask you something." She said, "Go ahead." He said, "Your grandson wrote something about you in the application. He wrote that you have spent your whole life making sure everyone around you had enough." He paused. "I want to know what enough looks like to you." The studio fell completely silent. Dot looked at Steve Harvey. She looked at Malik. Malik was looking at his shoes with the expression of a 19-year-old who has just learned that something private he did in good faith has become public and is in the process of determining whether he should be embarrassed or something else. He determined something else. He looked up. He met his grandmother's eyes. His hands, which had been over his mouth, lowered. Dot looked back at Steve. She said, "Enough means nobody in my house is cold, and nobody in my house is hungry, and nobody in my house goes to bed thinking they're not loved." She said it simply, the way she said everything. The studio fell completely silent in the way it falls silent when something has been defined so cleanly that the definition renders everything else temporarily unnecessary. Steve Harvey did not speak for a moment. He held her answer in the room. Then he said, "And what about you, Miss Dot? Are you cold? Are you hungry?" She gave him the slight, evaluating look. She said, "I manage." He said, "That's not what I asked." The studio held. Charisse, beside her mother, looked at the side of Dot's face. Her own face did the thing it does when she is very close to something she has spent a long time near but has never been able to touch directly. The particular expression of a daughter who loves her mother with her whole life and has also spent 42 years standing one room away from her mother's real interior. Dot looked at Steve. She was quiet for a moment, the Dot quiet, the one that meant she was making a decision about a door, whether it opened, and if so, how far. She said, "My car needs new tires. Bernard needs new tires. I've been managing without." It was the most she had said about a need in longer than she could clearly remember. It was not the whole of what needed saying. It was the one she could say. Steve nodded. He did not fill the space. He let the tires be what they were, which was not really about the tires. He said, "What else?" She said, "That's enough for today." He accepted this. He nodded once. He said, "Yes, ma'am." And he meant it as agreement rather than acknowledgement. "Yes, that is enough for today. And what you have given this room today is in itself enough." The studio fell completely silent for the third time, and then the audience, as one, began to applaud. Not because a game moment had occurred, not because anyone had scored anything, but because 300 people were expressing something that applause is not quite built for, and that they were using applause for anyway because it was what was available. The game resumed. The Simmons family played the final round with the focused intensity of people who have been reminded of what the stakes actually are. Dot answered the last question of the main game herself, cleanly, quickly, without hesitation, and the number that appeared on the board was large enough that the audience responded before the Simmons family did, the announcement of the total arriving in the room before any of them had fully processed what they were hearing. They had won $22,400. The number hung in the air of the studio. Steve watched Dot's face. Her face did what it always did when she was containing something large. It became very still. Her hands moved slightly. Charisse saw it. Malik saw it. Connie Marsh, who had known for 31 years, closed her eyes briefly. Steve brought the family to center stage. He held the ceremonial check in both hands. He looked at Dot. He said, "Miss Dot, what are you going to do with this?" And Dot Simmons, who had driven 41 minutes on surface streets in an 18-year-old Buick with 211,000 miles and tires she had been managing without, who had sat in a plastic chair in 2009 with a folder and a face that gave nothing away, who had spent 68 years making sure nobody in her house was cold or hungry or unloved. Dot Simmons did something no one in the building had seen before. She turned to Malik first. She said, "This is for your last 2 years of school, whatever the loans don't cover." She said the number she had in mind, $9,000, with the specificity of a woman who had already done the calculation, which meant she had done it before the game began, which meant she had decided before she walked out that if they won, this is what won meant. Malik said, "Grandma," she said, I'm not finished." The studio fell completely silent. She turned to Charisse. She said, "You and Percy have been carrying that car payment since January." "Don't tell me you haven't." "I know you have." She named the amount. She was correct. Charisse and Percy looked at each other with the expression of people who have just discovered that a secret they kept carefully was never secret. "That's 5 months. That's done." She turned to Connie. She said, "Your furnace." Connie said, "Dot." She said, "Your furnace has been making that sound since November. We are in February. I have been asking you for 3 months. Your furnace." She turned back to Steve. She said, in the same plain, undecorated voice, "That leaves me with enough for Bernard's tires and something for the month. That's what enough looks like." The studio fell completely silent in a way that was not empty but full. Full of the specific something that enters a room when a person demonstrates, in real time, in front of 300 strangers, the complete and undefended truth of who they are. Steve Harvey stood with the ceremonial check in his hands and looked at Dorothea Simmons for a long moment. His expression was not performed. It was the real thing, unguarded. The face of a man who has stood on this stage for years and has never seen exactly this. He said, "You did that before you left the stage." She said, "I knew what it was for before I got here." A camera operator at stage left put his camera on its mount. He stood with his arms at his sides. He was not crying precisely, but he was also not crying, which is its own category of response, and one that several people in that studio occupied simultaneously. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the camera. He did not announce that he was about to address the audience at home. He simply turned and spoke to them directly, without preamble. The way you speak to someone when the thing you need to say is too important for framing. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." His voice was the still voice, the one that comes after the performance has been set down. What you just watched is not generosity as a concept. It is not generosity as an aspiration or a lesson or a thing you mean to do someday when you have more. This woman did the math before she walked out. She knew what the money was for before she won it. She has always known what the money is for. She has known her whole life that enough is not a number. Enough is when the people you love are okay. He paused. Some of us spend our whole lives chasing enough and never getting there because we have the definition wrong, he said. Miss Dot has had the definition right since before most of us were born. I am going to think about that for a long time. The studio fell completely silent one final time, and this silence was not about the television show, or the prize, or anything that had a category in a production rundown. It was the silence of 300 people sitting with a definition they had just received and were holding carefully. The way you hold something you don't want to drop. But Steve wasn't done. He had made the calls during the setup for the preceding bonus round, 2 of them brief and direct, because he had known after the tires what this day was going to require and had not waited. The first was to a community auto service cooperative in Inglewood that worked with elderly residents on fixed incomes. Not a charity exactly, a cooperative, because the distinction mattered to Steve, and he had correctly guessed it would matter to Dot, that would assess Bernard and do what was needed beyond the tires, fully covered. He had also arranged, through a partnership the show maintained with a financial planning organization, for Malik to receive a meeting with a counselor who specialized in helping first-generation college students navigate the financial architecture of finishing a degree. Scholarships, grants, work-study options, so that the $9,000 could go further than $9,000 alone could go. The Figueiredo family had not needed to be asked. Vera had spoken to Marco and Paolo and Sofia during the scoring break, and they had agreed on something, and then Vera had crossed the stage and stood in front of Dot and said, in a voice that was steady and warm, "My mother came here from Coimbra in 1973 with $40 and a suitcase. She did what you do. She knew what enough was." She paused. "We would be honored if you would take our appearance fee toward Malik's school." Dot looked at her. She said, "I don't take money I haven't earned." Vera said, "Then take it as what it is, one family recognizing another." Dot was quiet for a long moment. She said, "I'll take it for the school fund, not for me." Vera said, "That's all we meant." Sofia Figueiredo, standing behind her aunt, was watching Dot with the full recording attention of a 16-year-old who has just been in the presence of something she will spend the rest of her life trying to describe accurately and never quite managing to, because some things resist description and can only be witnessed. 3 months after the taping, the clip of Dot saying, "I knew what it was for before I got here," had been viewed 79 million times. A personal finance organization cited the clip in a campaign about intentional giving, not as an advertisement, but as a case study, because what Dot had demonstrated was not a technique or a strategy, but a fundamental reorientation of the relationship between resources and purpose, and the organization's researchers had not found a cleaner example of it in 20 years of studying financial behavior. Connie Marsh's furnace had been replaced within the week. She had called Dot every day for 10 days afterward to report on how warm her apartment was. Dot had received these reports with the satisfaction of someone whose calculation has been confirmed correct. A year later, Malik was in his junior year and had, with the counselor's help, identified 3 grants that between them covered 70% of his remaining tuition, reducing the amount his grandmother's $9,000 needed to cover to $2,700. He had called Dot to tell her. She had said, "Good, I knew you'd find them." He had said, "Grandma, I didn't know they existed." She had said, "I know, that's why I got you the counselor." He had sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after she said that, understanding, not for the first time but more completely than before, that his grandmother did not do things in sequence. She did not first manage a crisis and then plan for the future. She planned for the future inside the crisis, simultaneously, because the future was always also happening, and you could not afford to set it down just because the present was demanding. Bernard got 4 new tires, a brake inspection, and a cooling system flush. He had, according to the mechanic at the cooperative, at least another 4 years in him. Dot had received this assessment with the nod of a woman whose faith in Bernard had been confirmed by independent professional evaluation. She had driven home on the new tires on surface streets, 41 minutes, no freeway, and had made dinner and called Charisse and told her not to make a fuss about the car payment, and Charisse had said she wouldn't and had made a fuss about it anyway, quietly, to Percy. Because some things you do privately when the person you would be fussing at has already told you not to fuss. Today, Dot still drives Bernard. The tires are good. The heat works. She still takes the surface streets. She still arrives early to everything. Her hands still move slightly more than necessary when she is nervous, which is the only tell she has ever had, and which she has never corrected, because correcting it would require acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would require telling someone she was nervous, which she does not do. Charisse knows. She has always known. She keeps the knowledge the way you keep the knowledge of someone's truest thing, carefully, privately, as its own form of love. Some people spend their whole lives learning to see the people they love. Charisse has always seen her mother. She just lets her mother not know, because that is what Dot needs. And knowing what someone needs and giving it to them in the form they can accept is its own definition of enough. What Dot Simmons demonstrated in that studio, in front of 300 strangers and a camera and Steve Harvey holding a large check, is not a principle that belongs to the wealthy or the saintly or the extraordinarily disciplined. It is available to anyone who has decided, in advance of having it, what the thing they want is actually for. The money was not the point. It never was. The point was Malik finishing school, and Percy's car payment, and Connie's furnace, and Bernard's tires, and the month. The point was nobody cold and nobody hungry, and nobody going to bed unloved. She had known that before she won it. She had known it before she got there. She had known it for 68 years in a row, and had simply been waiting, with characteristic patience, for the occasion to demonstrate it. Enough is not a number. It never was. It is a direction, toward the people you love, with everything you have, reliably, before you are asked. If Dot's story found the thing in you it was looking for, share it with someone who needs to be reminded what enough actually means. And subscribe, because every week there is another woman in a burgundy Buick who knows something the rest of us are still trying to learn.